guys very much. It's an honor to be here and an honor to be invited. It's quite unexpected. Supriya reached out, and um, just as Maitri was saying, myself and Anna are considered a part of the Next Wavers, the youth group. But it's for basically anyone who's a part of Ananda, who's newer to Ananda. If you've read my bio, I'll just give a little background on myself. I've been living here at the village, Ananda Village, for about 9 years now. And I came basically straight out of college. I came across the AY, the Autobiography of a Yogi, from my uncle. He sent it to me, and on a whim, as he put it. And the book changed my life, and so I came out here, and I've been living here since. And as a brief update, just by the way, Anna won't be joining this morning. She wasn't feeling last night. She was working outside in some sort of colder, wet weather, and last night she wasn't feeling that great. So she just slept in, and she just said, please just tell them she's sorry, and she'll, maybe she'll be able to connect next time. So anyway, but yeah, for myself, so I've been here for almost 10 years, and it's been an incredible journey. I actually I don't think I mentioned it in my bio, but I was a monk. I took monastic vows, brahmachari vows, in 2014. And I was a monk for almost 5 years. I decided to leave the vows, or jokingly renounce the renunciation vows, in 2018, the beginning of 2018. 2019, January. And so I was a monk here at the Ananda Monastery about 5 years. In fact, I think it was probably 3 or 4 years ago now, we actually, as a monastery, joined a Texas Satsang. You guys are prolific in your satsangs and reaching out to people, which is really, really inspiring. And Jitendra was there, and some of the other monks at the time.
Oh, right.
But anyway, so the topic for today seems all the more fitting in the light of the current situations right now, and the pandemic, this worldwide pandemic. Practicing the presence of God. It's such a. I was reflecting on it a lot recently, and getting ready to speak with you all and sharing with you guys. And it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, sitting down in meditation, you would think if you just dedicated even 5 minutes of just concentrating on God alone for 5 minutes, that proves to be a difficult task. And so putting even dedicating our lives to it, and daily meditation, and trying ever more deeply. I mean, as a monk, I mean, that was the focus of my life as much as I could make it, serving in various ways within the village. And but at home, at the monastery, that's much how I would spend my time. Just reading Swami books or Master's books, or listening to talks, or we would, be singing together, we'd be chanting. We were meditating 2 or 3 times a week, 3-hour meditation, morning meditation 2 hours. I mean, it was a lot more rigorous than I'm meditating now, to be honest. But when I think about the concept of practicing the presence of God, in reflecting upon years as a monk, and now here I have a partner, Anna, whom perhaps you'll get to meet sometime. We started dating not too long after I left the monastery, interesting enough. But when I was leaving the monastery, I knew I had a desire to have a partner. It came, I realized sort of the same day that that's something that I wanted in my life. And when I reflect back on those years to the time now, although the form isn't nearly the same in terms of how I dedicate my life, in terms of meditating so many hours or doing certain practices in order to stay in tune. I find I have a lot more joy and a lot more, mostly because I've been able to share love in a very real way with the partner. And it reminds me of a story when I was many years ago, 5 years ago, feels like a long time ago, I was at the Ananda meditation retreat with a friend, and we were getting ready to participate in a program, and him and I were just sharing. I don't know if you guys know Kali Das. His partner is Melody. They also live here at the village. They've been here for, I think, 12 or 13 years. And he was showing me photos on his phone of a picture of him and his wife, his child, and their cat. And I remember, and I had been a monk now for several years, and I was sort of thinking how I dedicated my life to God, and I was so, I was just doing everything I could, as best I could. But when I was looking at his photos on these phones, I remember the distinct thought that there's so much love and joy in his life, much more than I experienced in my life, and I feel like I'm doing the best I can to dedicate to God. But there's something so very real and tangible about having that. And so I came to the conclusion, sort of coming around full circle on this, that I came to realize more and more that loving God and practicing the presence of God comes down to loving God. It's there's this thing called the Game of Minutes by Frank Lawbach, which about this time every year he's usually mentioned, because when he thinks of practicing the presence of God, Brother Lawrence and Frank Lawbach are inevitably mentioned on this topic, and for good reason. These are very saintly souls, and they basically lived what they taught. That was the central focus of their lives, the concept of practicing the presence. But Frank Lawbach came up with this thing called the Game of Minutes, and it's the whole concept is basically holding the thought of God for 1 minute, and you practice. You try 1 minute. And even that can be exceedingly difficult unless you're already very calm or you're focused, which thank God for Kriya, because that helps go to prepare the way. But I realized that practicing the presence, even if it's the Game of Minutes, it's a good way to think of it in terms of it's a game, to make it fun, to make it enjoyable. The quest for God has to be joyful, and it has to have heart. There has to be some element of your love in it. Because you could play the Game of Minutes, and you could be very good at it, and you could go increasingly for hours on end thinking of God and holding this concept in your mind, but without the feeling in your heart, it doesn't do a whole lot. It's not going to take you there. It's a good practice, and it's for sure not to be dismissed. It's an excellent thing to do. But finding ways to open our hearts to God, I think that is essentially what practicing the presence of God is. Meditation, it's a challenging thing, I would say, for most everyone. The monkey mind and wandering thoughts and racing thoughts, or having no thoughts and feeling sleepy and sluggish and tired. But anywhere from thinking about what this person said to you earlier in the day, or what you're going to do for dinner later at night, or any number of things, to really just be present in the moment. But I think one thing that really helps to practice the presence of God, to really tune in to a consciousness of Divine Mother or Heavenly Father or the beloved or a friend, to try to feel his consciousness or her consciousness, however you want to put it, that infinite, that spirit that loves us all, and try and tune into that, and try and bring that into the world. One thing that has been coming up in my mind since I left the monastery was that it's a lot less about this day and age. The spiritual path is a lot less about sequestering and finding God, and more about finding ways to bring God in the world and through service. That's why in the talk that Swami wrote, it's a curious fact that in the reading today from the Rays of the One Light, that his focus in the Bible was on service. It was saying, if I had no food and you fed me, I had no drink and I was thirsting and you gave me drink, and I had no clothes, and you put clothes on my back. And he's talking about serving these people, and he said, well, how do we even know that when did we ever feed you? When did we ever put clothes on your back? And he said, whatever you've done to the least of my brethren, you've done unto me. Well, that's a tremendous concept to really try and start to apply in our daily life, that whatever service we provide, whatever we do, we're doing it to God. If we're being mean to a friend, we're sort of being mean to God in a very real way. If we're expressing kindness to a friend, we're expressing kindness. And so trying to apply in daily life the practicing the presence of God, there's very few of us who are going to be Ram Gopal Muzumdar sitting for 20 hours a day in a cave practicing Kriya, in super consciousness. That's just not realistic. And it's a good thing to want, but it's just really not that realistic. So how to bring God into daily life, I think, is the ideal way in this day and age, especially because of the pandemic, how to bring God into daily life. It's a lot tougher when you're at home. I mean, Anna and I were scheduled to go for vacation for a week to see her family in Seattle. And because of increasing restrictions and the rise of COVID, we were asked no one asked us, but we decided not to go. Many people canceled their Thanksgiving plans. And so we had 2 weeks off. We had a second week that we were already planning to do we were going to take seclusion because we were going to have enforced quarantine upon returning. Well, 2 weeks without going anywhere, without having any real plans, it's actually significantly tricky. And unless you have some way to focus your energy, so how to bring God into daily life? I mean, one of the greatest challenges is how to bring God into your home and how to bring God into the workplace, the two places where you are the most. It's one thing to be at the grocery store and pass someone with and give a friendly smile, or to be very genuinely sweet with the cashier. I mean, that's great. It's worthwhile, and it's absolutely something we should be practicing. But to be at home and to have someone you're living with whom we all have our ups and downs, and to be able to be kind and friendly when your loved one is going through a hard time, or when you're going through a hard time and they're supporting you, to be able to see, this is God working with me. This is God trying to support me. This is God trying to love me. And when your partner or you have a friend at work, your coworker is grumpy or something, maybe there's hardship in their life that we're not aware of. Everyone's life right now, I would say, to some degree, is being challenged in a much more exaggerated way than before COVID, in many different ways. And it's all the more important that we have compassion. And that's one way of practicing God's presence. I mean, I think typically when you think of practicing God's presence, the thought is typically it's sitting in meditation. But Swami didn't take any of the mystical teachings from the Bible in this reading on the rays of the one light. He didn't say, in terms of practicing the presence of God, he didn't use the quote, "If thine eye be single, then thy whole body shall be full of light." He very well could have. And I think for very significant and relevant to this day and age reasons he did not, it's because trying to find that balance. I mean, it's a difficult balance, and finding the right portion. I mean, chances are it's never going to be you're meditating for 12 hours a day and serving for 4 hours a day or 6 hours a day. It's more or less going to be you have some time in the morning, some time in the evening, maybe sometime in the middle of the day to meditate. And then most of the time, it's how do you apply it? As Sister Gyanamata, Master's foremost woman disciple, once said, your religion is tested in the cold light of day. So how you take the presence of God, how you open yourself up. Master said in one of his talks, and if you haven't listened to those SRF talks, they're really inspiring, but there's a wonderful quote on the practicing the presence of God, and he said, quote, Kriya is the highest practice in the presence of God. Kriya Yoga is absolutely necessary to really help us get in tune in an ongoing daily life to help us really feel if you're making a lifelong commitment to just be able to stay in tune, because it could be done but without it, I suppose, but it's so much more effective, and it's so much easier to feel God's presence after practicing Kriya than it is if you're just sitting. And one of the most important things I found in practicing meditation and or just serving throughout the community, I serve at Master's Market. I don't know if that's in the bio. I've been serving there a few years on and off as a chef, or now I'm helping with food ordering and managing the groceries throughout the store. That is to say, I lost the train of thought, but bringing God into daily life, one way or another, however you do it, it's whether it's at work or whether it's at home, you only have so much time to meditate. And so to make that meditation time count, to really sit down, that's now I remember, sincerity is, it's an essential quality for going deeper into meditation. I know a lot of people who have a really hard time meditating, and I think really when I've observed people over the years in the village, people close, friends, and I see how they've, I know some of their difficulties and I know some of their successes, and I find sincerity makes a big difference in many of these people's lives, that if you can really be sincere in meditation, and you can be sincere with God, if you have mistakes, you can share it with him. You can tell him the mistakes you've made. And he likes that, as the master said. He likes to know. It's not an easy thing to remember that God is the doer, but if we try to make him the central focus of our lives, whether we're practicing meditation, whether we're taking care of our child who's sick, whether we're helping our neighbor with something, helping them build a fence, whatever it is, if you make God the center of your life and you do it sincerely, he's always with us, even when we're not really practicing. It's an inspiring thing that Swami mentions in Rays of the Same Light, which is another book based on the same thing. He just elaborates a little longer to give ministers something to a focus on. And he was saying in it that those disciples that were redeemed, that were helping the poor and feeding the hungry and alleviating the woes of the sick, they didn't even realize they were serving Christ. It just wasn't in their awareness. They thought they were helping these people in need, which if Christ is in everyone, then he was in them. And he made the comment, Swami made the comment in the reading that if it's the fact that they weren't even aware that they were serving Christ means that what was most important is that they were serving. What was most important is that they were doing it with love. That you find God's presence with love more than you find it with creeds, as he put it. That it's not about memorizing Samadhi poem, which is great, not to knock it, but it's not about having a system of beliefs. Your system of beliefs is great, but it has to help us open our heart. It has to help us really feel God's love. And that's a hard thing to do in life when we're so busy and there's so many things happening. But if you make it a priority, and I highly recommend the practice of just sharing with God everything, sharing with him your successes, your failures, sharing with him in daily life whatever you're feeling, your thoughts. Even the very thought that, I forgot to think about God, kind of brings him back into your consciousness, helps you remember his presence. And you could sit, I've done a number of 8-hour meditations for Christmas, and they're glorious practices. I often find my mind wandering in those times, but at the end, over time, there's just this growing feeling of joy and a presence of something like the baby Christ, just so precious and so sweet and so tangible. But it's not like because we're not thinking of God, he won't be there. It's just, it helps us to be more in tune, hence the practice of Kriya. So finding ways to really share our lives with God and to really open ourselves up to his consciousness in whatever way. That could be serving, it could be serving your partner a meal, it could be taking care of a friend in need, it could be just calling someone you know who might be lonely. And that can be a very real way to bring God into your life. It's not just necessarily about holding the thought, the mental thought of God, but expressing him and sharing him in your soul, but also in this world. Now more than ever, the world is in need of light. And it's our responsibility here, if we're here to grow and to help the work and help become free and to help others. It's our responsibility to do whatever we can to bring light into this world. And so I thank you all for what you guys are doing and showing up and being here and just doing your best. And may God bless us all in these very unusual times.
Thank you, Sambhava. That was beautiful and sparked a lot of thoughts in my head. I want to invite everybody now to join us in satsang and discussion on the topic that Sambhava has introduced, and any questions, any comments are welcome. Open your cameras if you don't mind, and certainly you can either just open your mics when you're ready to speak, or you could go like this too, which somehow helps, or put it in the chat box. But we'll open it up now for discussion. So anybody would like to go?
You mentioned we're live on Facebook, right?
Oh yeah, well, I mentioned that before, but we'll mention it again. We're live on Facebook.
So yeah, if you don't feel that you want to be out there on Facebook, then go ahead and just put your question in the chat box, and we'll pass it on.
All right, so who would anybody like to chime in there first? See both Eric and Alex there right now. Is anybody else can you put the I call it the checkerboard, that's not what it is, but the gallery to see who's here. Yeah, okay.
Well, most of the time I really can't think of anything to say until I start talking. So I remember that Swami used to say at some point during his talks, he would make it a practice of going, and another important point is he would have no idea, and he would something would always fall out of his mouth.
Yeah.
It's funny, I was reading a book or listening to it. It was called A Brightly Guided Life, about a near-death experiencer who found time to always be speaking with God after her time. And she pointed at faith as just after a while expecting that something, just in that communication, something was born. And I don't often know, I do my best to practice the presence of God, but I don't know how many hours. I tried once, that 1 minute thing, and after 30 seconds, it's gone, and then a whole day is gone. And we can give ourselves a tough time about that. I can give myself a tough time about that. My hair was as brown as Sambhava's was when I kind of was here. I was the youngest person at Ananda for quite a few years in Dallas, but the time does pass. And I think our consciousness, when we do something for another person, it is changing the consciousness. They say one person who awakens 10,000 others. And really, what I've realized is I can only raise my consciousness a certain amount. It's not like always wanting to be at that final stage. It's being grateful enough for just more and more. And it isn't, I've always said to the people that came to Ananda Dallas, you're as much of like I used to give talks, and we haven't given talks in a couple of years now, I guess. But I say you're as much of a minister or a speaker as I am. You share in the same way I do by who you are. And even the people listening, they're sharing with you as you're speaking. And so that whole idea about just raising the consciousness level of the world, one person at a time, one individual at a time, is very real to me. And I don't know, I don't really have a question about that. I just want to acknowledge that every single person is always being a minister in the world. It's not knowing these certain things. It is practicing that consciousness in whatever way it comes. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you saying that. It does. It's so there. There are some people whom here I've interacted with in the village that they don't have any sort of public role, and that, but yet you can feel so uplifted around them that
Yes.
their very presence is like just uplifting, is a ministry. And in some ways, it's nice not to have the pressure of being put on the spotlight, and they can just go about, working in the gardens or working in the office place. But yeah, it's about the vibration. That's the most important thing.
I appraise homes, and I was in a home yesterday, and it was, for lack of a better word, just trashed out. The whole backyard was, and everything. But the 5 kids there were so joyous, and they would speak. Kids can often be in their own little world, and they don't. Every one of those kids came up to me and looked at me and asked me questions, and it was that kind of presence is like practicing the presence. And I realized their parents must have done an incredible job. They had nothing. This was looked like a very poor household I had walked into, but those kids were shining, and so were their parents. So they've shared with their kids, and I'm sure their kids will go out and be the same thing.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah.
The 2 words that popped in, that sort of stuck in my mind when you were talking, was sincerity and also relationship. And, some of us it's our karma, dharma, that we are in relationship. And I know, I'd lived at Ananda Village for 8 years before I moved to Texas. And I wasn't in relationship in Ananda Village. And I always sort of yearned for it, because it seemed like it was all about householder. There wasn't really a monastery there when I was there anyway. But I met my husband here, and not everybody has that karma or that destiny, and yet we all are in relationship. Even when we're by ourselves, we're in relationship, and so in practicing the presence, it doesn't matter whether you're in a romantic relationship or otherwise, we're always in relationship. And I think that's a lot of our learning on this planet that we've come to, is how can we practice presence, feel God's presence in each one that comes before us. And that's, to me, what the reading really hit home about today too. And immediately after I thought about it, I turned to Mark, and mine is more these days, without getting into a big discussion about it, is sort of the political scene. It's really sort of hard sometimes when and as devotees, I feel like this little cheat. It's not really a cheat, but this little cheat of like, well, I can be nasty when I'm talking about those people out there, but I realize, no, you can't, and so, really, literally praying, how do I see the light in some, and it must have been the same thing when, other times in history when there was, these sort of, I want to say, just sort of black holes of consciousness, and people of light. And I think the key is just to keep serving in your sphere of influence, and to keep, as like a meditation, redirecting those thoughts when they go there. You got to really work on that one, because you can get in a groove and a habit of like, but redirecting those thoughts to, your sphere of influence, and keeping your connection to God in that way, and then just dovetailing into the thought of sincerity. We aren't going to be perfect, and we are all really growing at all sorts of different levels. But as long as we're sincere wherever we're at, then we're going to get there, and we're expanding, and we are growing. And so, and I want to keep that in mind with all of my guru buys, because it's such an easy place to fall into sometimes with, again, just sort of like, well, where are they coming from, or whatever. Aren't they supposed to be more perfect, or whatever it is, because we're all sincerely seeking, there's a subtle expectation, right? But we can only feel that oneness in our hearts. We can't be in the minds of other people, and we certainly can't explain God's plan of what their plan is. It's each individual's seeking to find that dharma and where their spiritual journey is going to take them. But I just think relationship and sincerity, those are big words, and ones that can help guide us as we're navigating through this complicated world that we're in.
Yeah, thank you, Maitri. You're right. It's important. I don't think I explicitly stated it, but of course there is a relationship with God, and even if you're not living with anyone, if you don't have a partner, you don't have a pet, no bird, no cat, no dog, it is important to keep that relationship. And it's a lot harder, I feel, right now, because of just to be so isolated, to really not fall into the feeling of loneliness it's a difficult trap. And even holding to the thought of God and really trying to practice his presence can be very tough, especially if you're feeling lonely. And I think right now, the world at large, there's a lot, loneliness is already a rampant consciousness, but even more so now. And so trying to realize that there's a relationship going no matter what, whether you're on your own, the thoughts you keep are sort of the company you keep when you're by yourself, especially. And sincerity, you were saying, just in terms of sometimes it's like with other people, you would expect them to be perfect. I find I do that with myself a lot. And I find a lot of people that I know, friends that have shared, even Daisy has publicly declared on several occasions about how hard she'll be on herself. And so I find practicing sincerity and being okay with imperfection helps with the ongoing ups and downs of life. I mean, there are inevitable ups where things are going great, and there are inevitable downs where things are very challenging. And if you're just being real and honest with yourself and honest with God, then it's a lot easier to just keep going, to get up and just keep walking. But if you're insincere with yourself, it's a lot harder. If you can't just be okay with the way things yourself, then it's a very difficult trap that I would imagine most devotees, maybe not all, but I would have enough confidence to say most devotees fall into the trap of being too hard on themselves. I've heard too many ministers talk about that on themselves, and those are the people who you would think would be the least likely to be hard on themselves. So anyway, that's a helpful thing to keep in mind too, is just with sincerity especially, it's easier to be okay with our failings, because we're not going to grow by whipping ourselves. You can't chase out darkness with a stick. You have to turn on the light. And so being kind to ourselves as well as our neighbors will help. So.
Something that came to mind for me, Sambhava, was while you were talking, and was that several years ago you used to see these bumper stickers about practicing random acts of kindness. And I just saw a news story last night. Actually, I think it was on Saturday Night Live, but but it was a real story about how at some fast food place where somebody started a chain reaction. They paid for the person behind them in the drive-through line, and then that went on for hours, where the next person would come up and say, "Oh, well, in that case, I want to pay for the person behind me." And
they said 900 people. They said.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't remember the number, but it went on for hours, and and I think even if it's not a monetary thing like that, I know I used to when I remember to do it, is, you know, if I was interacting with some sort of a service person, just simply offer a brief little prayer for their well-being while you're interacting with them. And you know, I think the thing about the randomness is it's all about what's coming out of your heart. You know, you're not examining this person and going, are they worthy of this? You know, you're going, okay, I'm just going to open my heart, and you know, and in that way, being random, you know, we know that God is in all, and when we just do it randomly, we're not getting into the mind and intellectualizing about who the recipient is of our random act of kindness. We're simply doing it for the love of God. So that's what came to my mind.
Well said, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, it's why discriminate kindness? I mean, if as much as you can. I mean, there'll be times where if you're out in the world and you guys are probably visiting you probably come across more strangers than I do in my day-to-day, especially during isolation. It's mostly just community members, but you might give kindness to someone and they might think, what are you trying to get out of me? But if it's just coming from your own heart, if it's just coming from you, you'll be blessed by just having that, express that kindness. And of course, oftentimes people will respond in like, and what a beautiful story. 900 people doing that. I mean, that is incredible. And I would venture to guess that there was probably few, if any, of those people who thought, I'm doing this for God. They were probably thinking, it feels good to do something nice for someone. It feels good to be generous. They were in that expansive consciousness and they were doing something nice, and without even realizing it, they were acting on behalf of God, that God was flowing through them. And they had no idea. They just thought they were paying $6 for the person behind them for that burger or whatever. So, I mean, I just sort of imagine sort of like pulling back a little bit and trying to see that story unfolding, that picture. And I just imagine this enormous light, Christ's light, coming through and just filtering through all these people, and no one really having any idea. Maybe some of them, I'm sure many of them were probably devout religious folk or spiritual people. Otherwise, the materialists would say, $6, get out of here. Yeah. But anyway, that's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing, Mark.
Certainly.
I see Alex has got his mic open. Alex, are you wanting to say something?
I was just wondering if you remember me, Sambhava, from
I do.
all week, and I called you on the phone one time, but I lost your phone number. I dropped my phone in some water, so Maya had your way, so I lost your number. And anyway, I thought, the talk today was really great. I really appreciate you coming on, and Maitri's so nice to invite you, and that, I mean, I just really, really enjoyed it. So.
Yeah, well, thank you, Alex. Yeah, your hair's a lot longer than the last time I saw you.
Yeah.
Alex is the reason that you got invited, because we've asked for suggestions and he suggested, and I went, oh, I don't know Sambhava, and because there's newer people that, I mean, I've been out here for 20 years now, so it's a long time. There's a lot of people I don't know. But then Supriya had said that she had stayed in your guys' house or something, or next door. I think next door. Next door,
yeah. I've known Supriya over the years. She's come and gone from the village, so I've just got a chance to meet her, and yeah.
Right. So, but thank you, Alex, for
thank you.
Planting that seed, and thank you, Sambhava, for taking us up on our offer too. We appreciate that, because we really. Go ahead.
Can I ask another question? I was just wondering, you said that you left the monastery and now that you've developed a householder lifestyle, do you still think that you're going to make it to become a self-realized person, or to become a Jivan Mukta, or do you think you have the intensity to continue on? Because, the more responsibilities that get delegated to you, the less time that you have for your inner work and the more time that you take in your outer work. Are you feeling the pull, outwardly, that it's drawing on your devotion, or I don't know. I live in the world now, so I try to make everything about God, and I just kind of wonder.
Yeah, it's
I
a very good
don't have
question.
a partner, so
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's. I mean, I think the best answer I can give, the honest answer, is that everyone will inevitably find freedom. And whether it's this life or another life, I have to just say that's in God's hands for him to decide now. It's less, we all have our responsibility. As Master said beautifully, 25% is our effort, 25% is the Guru's effort, and 50% is God's grace. I think if we're all doing our best, and a lot of that comes just down to the sincerity of your own heart, not to the amount of time you spend in meditation or doing your spiritual practices, I think that's really the key. I mean, God watches the heart. He doesn't watch the clock. And I think for many of us, we probably watch the clock more than we would like to. So giving it your best, I mean, if there is a woman, a disciple of Master in the early days, and when he was alive in the body, and she was saying, I don't meditate very well at all. I think she was having some physical ailments and she just couldn't meditate. And he said, you go on and do your best. I'll meditate for you. So God takes care of us. It's more about what's in our hearts. If you're doing your best, and I find I have so much more capacity to love now with a partner, and she has a dog, and she brought her dog from Seattle, and a part of me was thinking, I don't really want a dog. I don't want the responsibility of a dog. I don't want that challenge. I don't want to feed the dog every day. But I was, out of support and love, have gone ahead with it, and I find so much joy in delighting in the dog. And I just try to remember that it's God's innocence coming through those dog's eyes, and it purifies my heart to give kindness, like Mark was saying, to just be loving to the dog. And so trying to see God in everything, I think, is one of the most essential parts of practicing the presence. And that means in the suffering, and that means in the hardship, not just in the good times and the good, sweet experiences. As Swami once said, life isn't all peaches and roses. So it's a great question, and I don't really know. There might have been a time earlier in my life where I would have been keen to have a more clear answer and say, I'm going to get there by my own efforts. But I just think that's less the case. I think it's more about God's grace and us putting out our best effort, and that may look different for everyone. For some people, your family responsibilities are going to be your dharma, and you'll attract so much grace if you do it with the thought of God as best you can. And even when we mess up or forget, or we get upset or angry with our loved ones, you come back and you just express forgiveness, and you try and love, and you make up. And God's grace is so beautifully in the family home, and I've come to see that more and more in the short time I've been in the householder. But I also live in a community with people, so I can see up close a lot of people who are living in different ways, and how it's successful for some and maybe less successful for others. So, but anyway, interesting question, Alex. Thank you for sharing, and thanks for inviting me along. Linda, did you have a question or a comment?
Well, yeah, I wanted to, it's something that Mark said sort of struck home. So a little bit of background, we have an app called Nextdoor, people in your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And a post popped up about a lady, and the word was elderly, which is a side story, but anyway, who needed help. She didn't have a place to stay. Anyway, it was horrible. And so I, tracked the post and, got in touch with her. And, but the more I talked to her and the more I read all the posts and stuff, it just seemed like something was a little bit off. She had very, very specific requirements that got more and more sort of complicated. And people were saying, well, what do you need? You need food, you need this or that. And she was just like, no, I just need money to have a place to live. And so anyway, I'm gonna actually meet with her later today. But to Mark's point, I've been having this thought of like, well, I wonder if she really deserves it, right? Is this really, or is this some kind of scam? Is she taking advantage? It was just, so I'm struggling with that. I mean, I am, I just be honest. I mean, I'd like to help her. I want to help her, but I just want to be sure, and maybe this is the wrong thing, right? I just want to be sure that that it's the right thing, in all cases. And that sounds judgmental when I say it out loud, to be honest.
Well, I think there's an element of it. There has to be discrimination in the spiritual life. You have to be able to discriminate, and that's different than judging. I mean, if you were to saying, well, if she's a scammer, then she's a scammer, and that's you, and you can say, I'm not going to participate, and that's discrimination. If you say she's a scammer and she should go to hell for that, that would be judgment. And so it's very important that you discriminate, and it's okay with, I think it's probably a very good thing to be conscious, and especially if you're going to make some sort of large donation or some sort of sacrifice on your part. But I would say go with an open heart and try to use your intuition to discriminate and feel if this woman, maybe she's just unhappy, maybe she's having a hard life, and it's, you could help her out. That might bring light into her eyes, and it might help bring joy into her life. But if on the other hand, it just feels like she's just out to take for herself, and she's really not interested in what you have to give, and or not interested in you, she just really wants money for herself so she can, then you're going to have to use your best judgment, and you might make a mistake, and that's okay, whatever you decide. But I think keep your heart open and then do what feels right. It's a tough, there are times when, Swami told a story of how once he received a ride. He was hitchhiking for something. He was getting a ride from someone, and the guy had just come back from some New Age convocation of like how you can influence people or something. He kind of got the feeling, and Swami was, the man said, Swami was giving this guy a ride. Swami wasn't hitchhiking. He gave this guy a ride. He needed to go somewhere, and the man said, "Oh, I promise you, I will pay you for this. I don't have any money on me right now, but I promise I'll pay you for the gas and your time." And he said, "I don't want you to lose your faith in humanity." And Swami, being Swami, said, "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for God. And if I had any faith in humanity, I would have lost it by now. I'm not trusting necessarily that you will give me money back. I trust that God will pay me back in his time as he sees fit." So in that way, it's sort of like, yeah, if you're doing it, if you decide this woman is just out for herself, but if in your heart you feel guided to say, well, she may not even be have the capacity to appreciate what you have to offer, your own heart is purified by what you give. And if you think to yourself, I'm doing this for God, and I have faith that God will pay me back or he'll take care of me, then it doesn't even matter where that woman's coming from. But, you just have to use your best understanding and what feels right in your heart to make that decision. It's not an easy decision. And certainly, speaking for myself, I wouldn't want to just be shammed. I would be cautious, but I would also try to do it with an open heart and see if you can really help her.
I'd say, well, we'll see. I just felt like I had to meet her in person because I was getting mixed signals from her talking on the phone. So yeah, well, thank you. Sure. I appreciate the distinction between discrimination and judgment because I was feeling judgmental.
Yeah.
And I might be, who knows.
That's okay. We'll just do our best.
So you're not doing that, Linda, in replacement for our walk in the rain, are you?
Well, I scheduled it for after what our walk would be, but since it's not going to happen, I guess I'll do it anyway.
I'll talk to you more about that later. Well, I have another question for you, Sambhava, sure. Just sort of pivoting a little bit here. Being that you are part of that new wave of energy that's rising up, and the work has, I think it's hard for any of us to wrap our minds around how much Spirit has expanded Ananda worldwide, and even during this pandemic, more of a sense of connection and expansion in so many different ways. I wonder if you have a feeling, and don't cop out on me on this and say, well, just God is going to guide me. But if you have a feeling, if you think your destiny is just to be at the village for the rest of your life, or that you feel at all that you'll be, out amongst the, be one of the pioneers, like out here in the prairie, like, because I mean, there's definitely a need for that kind of expansion, and it used to be in the old days, Swami always guided that, and then after Swami left his body, there's been less of that sense, you know what I mean? And for good reason, I think, because, there's a lot of consolidation that needed to happen too. But I'm just curious how you feel with your Dharma and along those lines.
That's not to cop out, but it's hard to say what the future holds. Personally, what I feel, I don't really know what is my Dharma. And in fact, that's been an ongoing, personal dilemma I've had for a long time. I've been serving in, a master's market and cooking food for people. And for a long time, I cooked for about 5 years at between Master's Market and the Expanding Light Retreat Kitchen. And a part of me thought, I don't think the rest of my life is going to be cooking food for people. I don't think that's my Dharma. I enjoy it, but a part of me was thinking, I hope that's not my Dharma for the rest of my life, but I'm okay with it if that's the case, because I just have this sense of I don't really know. I do know what you're talking about with Swami's, the expansiveness of Swami was something, I don't know if we'll see again in our lifetimes of an individual like that. He came with a divine mission, just like Master, to carry on the work, and the expansion was enormous. And right now, it's interesting that even Ananda has always found a way to expand, even in contracted times. Like specifically in Ananda Village in 1976, I think it was, when there was the forest fire, they decided, they were going to rebuild, and and shortly thereafter, Swami said, now we're going to go on the road and we're going to bring the teachings out to people. And so they did the joy tours for several years. And so that was one way of expanding. Now we're in a global pandemic. I mean, it doesn't get much more contracted than that. I mean, on a global level, individually, you can still be soaring in life, but in terms of the global situation, and yet Ananda worldwide has expanded tremendously through the internet. I mean, there are more programs now online than ever has been in the past. And I think that that's just the way Ananda, that's Swami and Master's presence working through so many different people's hearts and minds to keep the light spreading out, even amidst the pandemic. I have, now getting back to your original question about where I'll be, I don't think I'll be in the village for the rest of my life. Partly because I've had my own, over the years, I've had feelings of some impulse, almost some calling to serve abroad in another country. And also I had a reading with Drupada several times, of several different readings with him, and he had said one time, I see you going into foreign lands. And at the time I was living in the monastery, and I was sort of scratching my head and thinking, and doing what? I'm happy where I am. This is great. What foreign lands? Was there another monastery that I need to be at? So anyway, but I took it with a grain of salt, and more I could see it being a reality. But with the current, worldwide pandemic, there's not a lot of traveling. I mean, I don't leave Ananda Village even much these days, let alone outside the state of California or what have you. So that's a tough question to answer. You and Alex threw some, but yeah.
The thing is to remember that that term "foreign country" and Texas is often considered a foreign country and a different kind of planet sometimes even.
Yeah,
so if you really want to get out in outer space, you might consider here and just meditate on that.
Yeah, there's that reminds me, there was a very a vital young man from Texas named Tim. We call him Texas Tim. he was part of the internship program at Ananda Village last year, and he had I think it was a bumper sticker or a T-shirt or something. But anyway, it said keep Austin weird, and it had this like funny and. But anyway, yeah, I appreciate it. I would be happy to come out sometime. I think Jitendra and Prashad and them came out before to kind of do a program. You never know what life will hold. We
regularly, in the before times, and I assume in the after times will be similar, only different. We would bring people out here all the time, and
right.
It's great. I think that it's one of those things that if you feel, and I guess that maybe there's a little bit of projection here, but I know for myself, 20 plus years ago, I was sitting on the steps of Santa Chiara, the church in Assisi, mm-hmm. and it was I spent 3 months there, and I thought, it was life changing. It was clearly life changing. And when I was sitting there, this thought entered my mind, and I thought, oh my gosh. And it was just that thought that things were going to really shift, and that there was something more. And I never ever dreamed that I would leave Ananda Village. When I also was in Assisi, I never wanted to leave there. But it's interesting how Divine Mother takes us different places when we open up. And I would assume that maybe there's a lot of people at Ananda Village now because I know that all of us, even here, even though we're not as isolated as you guys, this is a time of great reflection. A lot of the static has quieted or faded in the background to our, angst sometimes, because we don't have all those distractions that helps, keep the ego a little more, feeling comforted and safe. But I would imagine that there is that, and all of us are asking those questions. I think what are our next steps, and those of us that are feeling very called to serve and deepen our spiritual lives in whatever manner consciously, are asking those questions. Bringing full circle here, bringing the divine into that question of what is next. Please guide me. So anyway, we will definitely keep you on that short list of coming and taking a tour of Texas. This is a different country.
Sure,
it definitely qualifies as one of those.
Recent arrival, I heartily agree.
To answer your question, Maitri, at least on a less personal and more broader way in terms of expanding and next waivers, I don't know what will be, not even for myself, but I do have a feeling that there will come a time where those people, particularly in the village, because there's a growing number of them, of young people, but also in Palo Alto and Seattle, there'll be a time where many of them will flee the coop, as it's, they'll leave their little nest where they've been grown and sort of raised, and they will either start their own centers or help bolster current centers or start communities or what have you. I think there will come a time. I kind of have that feeling. It's sort of like when you're growing up and you have your friends in middle school and then high school and then college, and suddenly left and right, your friends are getting married, and you're like, what is happening? What are all these people? And I kind of, it's just everyone starts going in their own unique directions. The little pod that you had is no longer, and now everyone's kind of finding their own niche in life. And I think that will happen in time, inevitably, that many people will start spreading out and taking what they've gained, and some of the youth it won't just be like an Ananda youth village. It won't be like 30s and 40-year-olds for the next 20 years, but I think those people are sort of getting some kind of training, and then when the time's right, they'll move on and they'll share what they have with other places. So, and I see some other faces on cameras now. You have some questions, David. Hi, Sonia and Eric.
Sonia, okay.
Any of you guys have questions? Sonia, she stayed at the village once. She's friends with Anna's sister, Alexandra. And so she
Oh.
came and stayed at the village once, and we got a chance to meet. So any questions, David or Eric or Sonia?
I had a
Oops, you got muted.
Your mic moves again.
There you
I
go.
was pressing my button there. I just had a few thoughts about what Linda was sharing around the question around giving to others. I think sometimes we get caught up in feeling good about giving to others, and it overmasters our sense of discernment, and we can't figure out a way in which the possibility of us not giving might also be in the best interest of that person. Because I think suffering comes to us when we're out of alignment with God. I'm just going to throw that out. We could argue that, I suppose. But, and sometimes when people are suffering, we have to let them have their suffering, because that's what is turning them to God. And if we interrupt that by an undiscerning rescue, it doesn't serve us or them. And I think that's a really hard lesson, is that there is a severe side to the laws of the universe. And sometimes people are so out of alignment with the laws of the universe that they're suffering, and they're not turning back. They're not open, and that suffering hasn't ripened, let's say. And we have to let it ripen. And that's painful for us, because we want to think of ourselves as giving or a rescuer or an agent of Jesus, and we focus on just Jesus's action of giving. But Jesus also had his severe moments too. And I think that fatherly side of God, sometimes we lose it a bit. And if we keep that in mind, I think we're kind of more balanced as adults in our relationship to the act of giving.
Yeah, it's a very interesting way to put it. And I think you're right. I think there is definitely an element of being aware and conscientious into how we give, and to be discriminative. I use an example. There's a woman I've worked with who is a very motherly figure, and she's a very, very loving woman, and she just has this tendency to just want to give things. And she started her own business recently, and she has this little cafe that she has, and she's making baked goods, and she has all these things, and she's starting her own business, and she's already running on minimum, most people here at the village are on minimum wage, and she's starting her own village. You're welcome, Mallory. She's starting her own business, and she's put a lot of her own money into it, most of her money, and most of her savings, which wasn't a lot to begin with. And she has this tendency of like giving away things. She's like giving away, she'll just give away her baked goods. She'll just say, "Oh, you have it." And they'll say, "Well, why don't I?" And I think there's an element there of, and I've done this too, but there's an element of it feels good, and so therefore you do it. And it might not necessarily be the right thing. For instance, it could put her business under if she's not careful in that circumstance. But yeah, I've experienced it before. Sometimes my mom is a gift giver, and she likes to give gifts, and I kind of picked that up a little bit from my mom, just wanting to always really utilize birthdays and Christmases and wanting to give a gift to someone. And there were times where I felt like, I really I found something that this would be a really nice gift for someone. And I felt like, I really want to give it to them. But it didn't seem right. It's like, why am I giving them a gift for no apparent reason? It made me question my motives. Was there some sort of expectation of wanting in return? It's a good point to be aware of, and I think it comes down to doing what you feel right, in terms of if it feels right to just give and give, then that's totally fair. There's a good story along these lines a little bit from the autobiography of a yogi, very first few chapters, where Master's mother and father they have very different approaches to money and how they approach things. And his Master's mom was always happy to give to the poor. And there was someone who, I don't remember the exact circumstances, someone she gave money to who really needed money, but it was a large sum of money, and her husband, Master's father, said, "Dear, you really can't be giving out that kind of money. It's just not appropriate. That's a large chunk of our earnings for this month or whatever." And she said, and she was hurt and she was offended, and he said, "Well, think about it. You just got to be more conscientious of how you do it." And then she reminded him of how when he was young, I don't remember the story exactly now. Something about there was like a penny that was withheld from him because of the lawyer or something. I don't remember the story well enough to be telling it now that I come to think of it. But anyway, and she was saying, and look how begrudgingly you have held over the fact that he didn't give you that penny. And he kind of realized, yeah, you're right. Maybe it's okay to give. Not a great example, but nonetheless, I see what you're saying, and I think there is validity to it. You just have to do what feels right. I think sometimes you're right. There's a story of another woman, an Indian woman. She was a saint. She had the powers to heal, and her father was very ill, and her family was adamant that she heal her father. She heals all these other people. Why won't she heal her father? And she said again and again that it wouldn't be good for him. But eventually she broke down under everything her mother and her sister and brother were all saying she needs to heal their father. And so she did, and he was healed. But then it wasn't long after that he got even worse and went back down the same route because he wasn't given a chance to heal. And Master said things like that as well, that he didn't believe in welfare programs because you keep people down by giving them money and not allowing them to work. But we have to be careful, sort of like what Mark was saying. When you open your heart to give, we're purified. If we're going around, being discriminative, yes, kind of like what you're suggesting. But if we're saying, well, this person's suffering, that's their problem, they need to suffer, they have to find God that way, then we have to be careful because of what that might do to our own heart. If we're coming from compassion and sympathy and we feel like, this person really needs, it would not be for their best interest. If you're genuinely coming from that consciousness, then it very well could be the right thing. It could still be the right thing if you don't give them money, but if in our own hearts we're saying, you are suffering, you need to suffer, this isn't for your best interest, God will help you, then we're doing a disservice to ourselves. So anyway, it's maybe a long drawn out answer for that, but there are multiple sides to all these topics, and I think that's a good perspective for Linda. But yeah, she'll just have to make her decision as best she knows. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, I think about like when I'm driving on the street and I see someone standing on the side of the road and they want my money, and I feel like I have an instant hit. I feel like, oh, I need to give that person money. I can feel it in my heart, like there's a resonance, like they really are suffering and open, and there's a sense of gratitude. And there's other moments where the thought of giving them money, and I know this is very sharp, but it almost disgusts me. It feels like, oh, that would be so wrong to give them money. It would be like I'd be involving myself in a karmic relationship that is not right. And I feel like in my experience of giving, I get very strong hits on one side or the other. And I think that's kind of what we're given to negotiate in terms of our response to other people's need. I mean, of course, the erring should be always on the side of challenging ourselves. Am I not wanting to give because I'm feeling tight or selfish, and being deeply aware of that? Or is it really that there's an inappropriateness in this, as Linda might be sensing in this situation? Yeah. We need to feel that out.
Right. Absolutely. And if it feels inappropriate, then that's totally fine. That would be discriminating, and just without any sort of emotional condemnation of the person or the situation, then you're right. I think there are times to say, it's inappropriate and it's not. Master didn't really encourage giving money to beggars on the street, because then it's encouraging them to do what they're already doing rather than getting up on their own 2 feet and getting a job. But there's another story, one of the talks he said, one of the SRF talks where he's actually recorded, he says, yeah, he actually gave money to someone because, you know, he realized that in the restaurant, he left a large tip, but then he's walking out and he won't give anything to this guy. And he said, well, I just decided to give it to him anyway and thinking I'm giving it to God. And he walked away and he said he felt so great. And that's coming from, you know, Yogananda. So, you know, there are times maybe you feel it would be disgusting to give it to him, and you can just say, I'm going to give this to God, and then give it to him, and then just see how you feel afterwards. And it's a tough thing. Yes, Eric?
Yeah, no, I was thinking, you know, I think Jesus would, you know, or the master would always say, give something to anybody who asks. I think he said that, but it doesn't always have to be money.
Sure.
You know, it's true. There's even the people that I feel, like Eric was saying, that you just feel that something is awry, you can still give them something. And that is when I was going through India. I've been to India many times, and as I see the people coming up to me on the streets sometimes, I learned over time, you can connect with them. You can give them something in each interaction, in every interaction, especially the ones you don't trust. There's something that you can connect there. And we often think we have to have some job as a social worker, or as, you know, that we have some mission like past Ananda leaders, and we think we have to copy that. I don't hold that anymore. I do think it's a moment-to-moment consciousness that we're building, and we're listening for that way that God is whispering to us, so we can discern well. We can always give, and I have found that I could give to every single person who asked me in India, and most of the time it was not money. Sometimes I'd give some candy or something, or money if it was appropriate, but you always have something to give. And what Linda's going to give to that person, I know her. I know what she gives to people. She gives way more than her money. So it's that way.
What a beautiful thought. I love that, Eric. I was waiting for you to jump on because Eric is one of our, he's one of the biggest hearted people I know, and is such a karma yogi, and heads up our Seva projects with his wife Shakti, and it is so fearless in his giving. And, you know, and I want to take it back to that whole thing of what's the energy underneath it all, and how do we keep our hearts open? As Eric was saying, you can give in so many different ways, and the important thing here is how are we, you know, letting that energy flow and continue that, you know, upliftment.
Yeah, it's a beautiful answer, and that's one way, Eric Shaw, that if ever you see someone on the side of the road who's begging for money and you know it's not appropriate, you could always just send them a prayer and say, I wish you well, and I hope you'll find the success and joy you're looking for, even if it comes through suffering. So that's a great answer and a great way to think of it.
Yeah.
Sonia or David, did you guys have a question?
No, it's not for me.
Yeah, you know, I think I remember the story that Raghu always told, because he started following what Eric and Shakti were doing. Was he would carry some kind of food in the car, you know, something portable and not perishable, you know, some sort of food bar, granola bar, or something like that. And when he'd see people, you know, on the street asking for money, he'd say, I have these bars. Are you hungry? Would you like something to eat? You know, so yeah, it doesn't always have to be money, but I think the underlying energy with which you give something is probably more important than the giving. You know, if we can't give with an open heart, then what good? It's probably not doing us any good, and it may not be doing them any good either. So I think that's the consciousness behind it is really important.
Yeah, especially, I mean, because you could give with the thought of expectation of return, and then it's tainted, and it's still better than not giving, but it's still not a pure expression of love or pure giving when you want something in return. So that reminds me of a story where Swami was saying, there was a guy in India named, I think it was Birla, he grew up in a wealthy family, very wealthy family, and he came up to a pundit and he was ready to give up his life for God. And the pundit said, look, your whole family are merchants. They've become wealthy through the merchant process. And you are a merchant. And it is your dharma to earn money and just find a way to use it in a beneficial way for humanity. So he went and he built this hospital, and he made a lot of money. I don't recall if Swami said it was millions, but he made a lot of money. And then he took that money and then he built a temple. And that temple, and Swami said when he met him, you wouldn't know that he was a wealthy owner of this hospital and temple, but he was just a humble man. And he was following his dharma and his guidance. And his guidance was it was his responsibility to make money. And if he didn't do it, he would be going against his dharma, and he would have been doing a harm to himself spiritually, which you would think, making money, how is that, is that really spiritual? But in his case, it was. And for many people, our dharma may not look like what we want or expect or hope, but if we do it, and hopefully sooner than if we don't keep telling God no for 8 years, then it'd be great. But we all say no sometimes, so